Hey guys, this is Professor Street Bunny, and we're going to talk today about Act 5, Scenes 1 and 2. So remember where we left off? We had Juliet's family finding her dead, and we talked about how hypocritical they all were. Remember, her mom and dad both treated her very poorly and said some hateful things to her literally just the day before. And now they're acting like their world has ended, all their joy is dead, they might as well be dead, etc. Super hypocritical. Now, there was a misunderstanding among some of you. Some of you said in your paragraphs that Lord Capulet thought Juliet was faking her death. That is not true. He thought it was surreal. Remember, surreal means that your mind is having a hard time accepting something that your eyes see and know is true. And so maybe that's where you got the idea, but he did not for an instant think that she was faking her death. Nobody in that room knows until Friar Lawrence shows up and tries to talk to them about, look, she's in heaven, we should rush off and get her in the tomb. Partly because he just wants to make sure she's not going to wake up before she's in the tomb, probably. The nurse also took things very badly, and remember, she probably wasn't too hypocritical other than the fact that she did give up on her, and at the worst possible time when she should have been standing up for Juliet and supporting her, she didn't. So let's go ahead and start into Act 5, Scene 1. First off, we go off to Mantua. And poor Romeo has a dream, kind of mixed in with a premonition as well, part of which is true, part of it which is not. He has this dream that Juliet finds him dead. That part's going to be true. That's a full-on premonition. The other part, however, is that she kisses him and he awakes and he is filled with joy. He says that how sweet is love itself possessed when but lets shadow are so rich in joy. So he's saying here that even just her memory brings me such joy, and being with her, and what a magical kiss she had to wake me from my death, and I revived and was an emperor. So poor Romeo, he's in a really good mood this morning until Balthazar comes in. Balthazar, remember, is one of his servants that was in Act 1, Scene 1, the sword fight, the Bite Your Thumb at Us, Sir scene at the very beginning. So he comes in, and Romeo's all excited and says, Balthazar, news from Verona? Dost thou bring me letters from the friar? How is Juliet? Is my father well? He says, nothing can be ill if she is well. Well, Balthazar responds kind of oddly at first. He says, well, she is well, and nothing can be ill. And he's talking about in the long term. Again, he knows Juliet is in heaven, and so that's why he says this. He says, her body sleeps in Capel's monument, and her immortal part with angels lives. Now, how does he know that? This is where we have another huge example of fate. Because of all the parts of town Balthazar could have been in, where is he? He's going by the cemetery when Juliet is being put into the tomb. That is not a coincidence. That is not an accident. That is not just bad timing. They would have believed this was full-on fate. He says, I saw her laid low in her kindred's vault, and presently took post to tell you. So he left instantly. He didn't even stick around. He saw it. He ran off. Really bad timing. That's what fate does here, is he has Balthazar see this. Because obviously now, Romeo is going to think she's dead. Why? Because we're going to find out in a minute, no letters from Friar Lawrence yet. And we're going to find out why. So Romeo says instantly, I defy you stars. He knows fate is in control of this, just in a little different way than he thinks. He says he's going to go straight home. He tells Balthazar, go hire some horses. And Balthazar says, we need to wait a minute. Your looks are pale and wild and do import some misadventure. He says, let's be patient. I beg you just to calm down for a minute and let's take some time. Again, we know Romeo acts rashly, we know he acts quickly, and he is instantly going to race back to Juliet. Remember when we talk about their tragic flaws, the tragic flaws of Romeo and Juliet? They rush into everything. No different toward the end of our play here. So Romeo tells Balthazar, no, don't worry about me, I'm fine. And he asks him again, do you not have a letter from the friar? And Balthazar says, no. And Romeo says, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. Go hire those horses, and I'm going to join you. So right out of the gate, we know what Romeo's going to do. He says, well, Juliet, I will lie with thee tonight. So he's instantly decided, if she's dead, I'm dead. I'm going to join her in death. Then he says, let's see for means. So how can I do this thing? How can I kill myself? And then he says, O mischief, thou art swift to enter in the thoughts of desperate men. Because when he thinks how, instantly fate almost whispers in his ear. About just prior, he was walking through the streets of Mantua, and he saw an apothecary shop. An apothecary, guys, is kind of like a medicine man. He goes by this shop, and he notices something very different about it. Now, apothecary is kind of a strange word. If you go to Europe today, they still have drugstores or pharmacists that are called apothecaries. They have a big green plus sign out in front of them, very easy to spot. But what's different about this apothecary, guys, is his shop is very poor. He has very little, but he has it spread around to make it look like more. And he says, noticing this penury, noticing the poverty, this guy, business is not being kind to him. He's poor. He says to himself, and if a man did need a poison now, whose sale is present death in Mantua, here lives a caitiff wretch would sell it him. So, for some strange reason, when he sees how poor this guy is, it crosses his mind, wow, I bet you, even though poison's illegal right now, he'd probably sell it to me or sell it to anyone because he's so poor. So he says, oh, this same thought did but forerun my need. He recognized the irony of that. It's kind of strange that I would think this before I even needed it. And he goes up to the shop. He calls out the apothecary. He full on tells him at the beginning, he says, look, I know you're poor. I'm going to give you 40 ducats, which is quite a bit of money, especially to somebody who's poor. I want to get some poison, and I want it to be fast acting so that the life-weary taker may fall dead and that the trunk may be discharged of breath as violently as hasty power fired doth hurry from a fatal cannon's womb. So he wants it to work as fast as a cannon shooting, or a cannonball shooting out of a cannon. And the apothecary reminds him. He says, such mortal drugs I have, but Mantua's law is death to any he who utters them. So he reminds him, it's illegal. I could get the death penalty for this. And that's when Romeo gets real. And he calls into question something called situational ethics. Situational ethics means you're going to compromise your morals, go against what you know is right. Why? Because of the situation. Ethics, being ethical, means you're moral and you do what's right. Situational ethics means that you choose when you're going to do this and when you're not, dependent on your situation. So he says, look, aren't you afraid to die? Aren't you so poor and so hungry? I can see it in your eyes. Look, contempt and beggary hangs upon thy back. And if we're going to be honest, the world isn't your friend. The world's law, definitely not your friend. So I would say, break this, go against it. And the apothecary goes in and gives in pretty quickly. He says, my poverty but not my will consents. Romeo says, I'm paying your poverty, not your will. I realize that. I know that you're doing this because you're poor. And then the apothecary gives him the poison. He says, put this in any liquid thing you have and drink it off. And if you had the strength of 20 men, it would dispatch you straight. So he says, not only is this quick, it is powerful. It is so strong that this one small vial of poison could kill 20 men. And then Romeo gets a little philosophical, and as he gives him his money, he says, there is that gold who's poisoned to men's souls, doing more murders in this loathsome world. So he's saying, you're not selling me poison. I'm poisoning you because I just got you to compromise your morals for money. So he talks about how the love of money, the root of all evil, a little hypocritical because he's kind of manipulating the apothecary into doing this because he knew how he could. And then he honestly just calls him out on it. A little sketchy, but now he has his poison. And he says to the apothecary, go get yourself some food. You're obviously in need. And then he talks to the potion and he says, come cordial and not poison. Go with me to Juliet's grave, for there must I use thee. So we know his plan is to go die by Juliet's side and to drink this poison. Now, next scene, scene 2. We're at Friar Lawrence's cell, and we're going to find out whatever happened to that letter. So Friar John comes in. We're meeting him for the first time. He's another pastor. He's one of Friar Lawrence's friends. And we find out he was supposed to deliver the letter. So when Friar Lawrence sees him, he says, welcome from Mantua. What says Romeo? Or if he didn't write something, what did he tell you to tell me? And that's when Friar Lawrence tells us what happened. Again, guys, huge example of fate in this play. Perhaps one of the biggest ones. Friar John says, going to find a barefoot brother out, one of our order to associate me. So he was going to road trip to Mantua to deliver this letter. He decided, I'm not going to go by myself. I'm going to go get my buddy Friar John. He's good for a road trip. And he went to find him. Where was Friar John? Well, I would bet you a lot of our pastors do this, and that is Friar John was visiting the sick. So he was ministering to some sick people. Now, here's where it gets tricky. He says, the searchers of the town, finding him and suspecting that we both were in a house where the infectious pestilence did reign, sealed up the doors and would not let us forth. Pretty timely here, guys, because we all know what that means. Yes, it's quarantine, the ultimate in social distancing. So Friar John was helping some sick people. Friar Lawrence stopped by to get him to road trip with him. And while he was at that house, the town officials in charge of keeping people healthy quarantined them both in the house. So Friar Lawrence says, then who took my letter? Who delivered the letter to Romeo? And Friar John says, they were so afraid of infection and this quarantine dictated that I couldn't even pass the letter out of that house. So here it is back. And he literally hands it back to Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence probably had the scariest, most horrified look on his face ever. And he says the most understated line of the entire play. He says, this is not good, for this letter was pretty important. And I think because it wasn't delivered, it could cause a lot of problems. Do you think, Friar Lawrence? Yep. So then he tells Friar John, go get me a crowbar and meet me back here in a minute. And he says to himself a soliloquy when Friar John leaves. He says, now I must to the monument alone. So he's going to go to the cemetery. Within 3 hours will fair Juliet wake. So Juliet's about ready to wake up. She will beshrew me much that Romeo hath had no notice of these accidents. So he knows she's going to be upset because Romeo's not there. But it's all good, because I will ride again to Mantua, and I will keep her at my cell till Romeo comes. So he says, I can still salvage this. And if you're keeping track, this is like his third plan that he's come up with. That he will go there, he will be there when Juliet wakes up, he will take Juliet back to his cell, his house, he will hide her there, he will write another letter to Romeo, and it will all still end up happily ever after. One small problem. Remember the fate thing. Remember, Romeo thinks Juliet's dead because he did not get that letter, and unfortunately, Balthazar saw Juliet laid in the tomb. So, at this point, all roads are leading to the graveyard. Why? Juliet's already there, of course. Romeo's running back there to kill himself by Juliet's side. And now Friar Lawrence is going there to rescue Juliet before she gets too upset that she's in there by herself. And in scene 3, there's going to be somebody else at the cemetery. It will be our poor toad boy, Paris, who is bemoaning the fact that he had one chance of happiness, and he will be there putting flowers on his fiance's grave when Romeo shows up. So, kind of ironically on Paris' behalf, Paris thought that his one true chance at happiness, his only chance at happiness in marriage, was Juliet. Well, that's true, because this is not going to end well for Paris. And it is going to be another thing that pushes Romeo to do what he's already decided to do. So we're going to leave off there for today, guys. I want you to be thinking about all of the ways that fate is messing with our characters, messing with Friar Lawrence's plans. Poor Friar Lawrence, he keeps coming up with these plans, and almost instantly they fall apart. So again, do you think this plan's going to work for Friar Lawrence? Even though he's the man with a plan, they all fall apart. So anyway, till next time, remember you're blessed to be a blessing, and we will talk to you soon, guys. Take care. Be safe.